Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the greatest military minds in history, fought and defeated armies across Europe. But one summer afternoon, he faced a terrifying, unstoppable enemy, thousands of rabbits. And this time, Napoleon lost. Napoleon Bonaparte, military genius, emperor of France and conqueror of Europe, wasn't known for losing battles. He marched across the continent with discipline, precision, and raw ambition, toppling empires and rewriting history. But in the summer of 1807, after signing a peace treaty and preparing to celebrate with his generals, Napoleon encountered an enemy so unexpected, so absurd, that it turned his glorious reputation on its head. It wasn't an army of men. It wasn't a fleet of ships. It wasn't even a band of assassins. Instead, Napoleon Bonaparte found himself hunted across a field by thousands of rabbits. Yes, rabbits. What began as a light-hearted hunting party turned into pure chaos when cages were opened and a furry army surged forward. But instead of fleeing, the rabbits charged straight for the emperor and his men. And in this bizarre moment of history, Napoleon and his battle-hardened soldiers retreated, not from muskets and sabers, but from 3,000 fluffy, furious bunnies. In today's Nutty History, we're diving into one of the strangest stories ever told about Napoleon, the day the world's greatest general was defeated by rabbits. When you picture Napoleon Bonaparte, you probably think of him on the battlefield, his hand tucked into his uniform, cannons blasting, armies marching. But in July of 1807, Napoleon wasn't leading troops. He was celebrating victory. After years of war, Napoleon had just signed the Treaty of Tilsit with Tsar Alexander I of Russia. It was a massive political triumph that temporarily brought peace between France and Russia. For once, Europe was quiet, and Napoleon was on top of the world. To mark the occasion, the emperor wanted to reward his marshals, generals, and loyal officials with a day of fun and camaraderie. But Napoleon didn't do things the small way. He didn't just plan a quiet lunch. He wanted a spectacle, and that spectacle was going to be a grand hunting party, a chance for him and his men to relax, bond, and show off their shooting skills. Here's the thing. Hunting wasn't just a pastime in Europe. It was a mark of nobility, power, and tradition. Kings hunted, aristocrats hunted, and now the Emperor of France would host a hunt to rival any monarchs. Napoleon ordered his chief of staff, Alexandre Berthier, to make all the arrangements. Berthier took the job seriously. He rented out fields, prepared the grounds, and most importantly, secured the prey, rabbits. Lots of rabbits. After all, what's a hunt without game? But Berthier made one crucial mistake. Instead of capturing wild hares, he bought tame, farm-raised rabbits. Why? Probably because it was easier and guaranteed plenty of targets. He had hundreds, some accounts say as many as 3,000 rabbits, brought in cages to be released for the grand event. At first, it all seemed perfect. Napoleon arrived with his entourage, dressed for the hunt, weapons ready. The generals laughed, spirits were high, and everyone was eager for the chase. But when the cages opened, the hunt didn't go as planned. The rabbits didn't scatter across the field in panic like wild hares normally would. Instead, something bizarre happened. The rabbits charged. Why? Because these were farm rabbits raised on handouts from humans. To them, men with baskets, carriages, and uniforms didn't mean danger. They meant food. The furry horde surged toward Napoleon and his generals, not away from them. What began as a day of celebration was about to descend into one of the strangest scenes in European history. Napoleon, the man who defeated Austrian armies, Russian battalions, and Prussian legions, was about to be swarmed. By bunnies, the cages opened. Instead of darting away in every direction like wild game normally would, the rabbits poured out in a furry wave. At first, the hunters chuckled. The marshals and generals probably thought the creatures were confused. But then the laughter faded because the rabbits didn't scatter. They charged. Imagine the scene. Napoleon standing confidently, musket in hand, scanning the horizon for his prey. Instead of glimpsing hares bounding across the fields, he sees hundreds, no, thousands of rabbits racing straight toward him. Not in fear, but in hunger. At first, it must have seemed like a joke. A few rabbits hopping close, maybe tugging at a boot. But within moments, the field was alive with fur and teeth. Witnesses described rabbits swarming Napoleon's legs, climbing his coat, and leaping into the laps of his officers. These weren't timid creatures, they were tame, farm-fed animals, and to them, the emperor and his men weren't hunters. They were dinner, Rabbits nibbled at uniforms, chewed on straps, and clawed their way into baskets and carriages in search of food. Napoleon tried to shoo them away, but the swarm just grew thicker. Some accounts say that when soldiers swung their sticks or tried firing shots into the air, the rabbits simply regrouped and charged again. It wasn't a hunt anymore, it was an invasion. Think about this for a moment. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who outmaneuvered entire armies, was being outflanked by bunnies. His carefully planned hunting party had turned into a scene of slapstick chaos. Rabbits weren't fleeing, they were advancing in ranks. Like furry little battalions, the Emperor, who had once stared down cannon fire at Austerlitz, now found himself stepping backward, trying to avoid being buried in fur. Some rabbits even made their way up into his carriage, forcing Napoleon to retreat in haste. The generals laughed nervously, but the situation was quickly spinning out of control. This wasn't just embarrassing, it was surreal. Accounts differ on how bad the battle got. Some say a few hundred rabbits charged. Others insist it was closer to 3,000. Either way, the scene left an unforgettable mark. Napoleon was forced to retreat. Yes, retreat from the onslaught. He and his men abandoned the field, retreating to their carriages while rabbits overran the grounds like tiny conquerors. And here's the kicker. Napoleon's men actually had to fight their way clear of the swarm. Rabbits clung to coats, scrambled into boots, and gnawed on whatever they could. The hunting party ended not with a bang, but with a flood of fluffy chaos. It was one of the rare times in Napoleon's life where he was utterly unprepared, caught off guard, and forced into flight. Not by military genius or superior weapons, but by bunnies. And this raises the next nutty question. How on earth did this happen? Why did 3,000 rabbits act like they were storming a buffet instead of fleeing for their lives? So how did Napoleon, the man who brought Europe to its knees, end up running for his life from a herd of fluffy rabbits? The answer isn't just funny, it's downright ridiculous. You see, Napoleon didn't personally organize every detail of this hunting trip. He had men for that. His trusted chief of staff, Alexandre Berthier, was tasked with making sure the emperor's hunt went smoothly. And Berthier wanted to impress. Nothing could go wrong when the emperor himself was attending, or at least, that was the plan. Instead of capturing wild hares, which are fast, fierce, and nearly impossible to wrangle in huge numbers, Berthier took a shortcut. He ordered farmers to gather domesticated rabbits, tame, plump, farm-raised animals used to being fed by humans. Reports suggest they brought in anywhere from a few hundred to as many as 3,000 of them, and here's the kicker. To these rabbits, humans weren't predators. They were providers. When the cages opened, the rabbits didn't think, "Oh no, time to run!" They thought, dinner is served. Imagine their perspective. Raised in pens, given daily food, they associated humans with safety and feeding time. So when Napoleon and his generals showed up, dressed in fine coats and carrying baskets, the rabbits assumed the buffet was open. No fear, just an army of bunnies stampeding toward the very people who were supposed to hunt them. That's why the rabbits swarmed Napoleon instead of scattering. They weren't wild prey animals. They were livestock with appetites. In their minds, the hunting party wasn't a threat, it was a feast. Some historians believe Berthier had no idea this would happen. He probably thought tame rabbits would make the hunt easier. After all, the emperor was busy conquering Europe. Why make him chase down wild game? But Berthier's clever shortcut backfired spectacularly. Instead of giving Napoleon a glorious, controlled hunt, he unleashed a furry frenzy that turned the emperor into prey. And the irony here is delicious. Napoleon had fought Austrians, Prussians, and Russians. He had outmaneuvered coalitions of Europe's strongest powers. Yet here on a sunny afternoon, he was forced into retreat by bunnies that wanted lunch. The fiasco also reveals something deeper about Napoleon's image. He prided himself on control, precision, and military genius. But this ridiculous scene stripped away that aura, if only for a moment. Imagine being one of his marshals, used to seeing Napoleon as untouchable, then watching him flail at rabbits climbing up his boots. It was absurd, humiliating, and unforgettable. The story spread like wildfire, whispered among officers, soldiers, and even citizens. It became one of those anecdotes that stuck to Napoleon's legend, not as a grand failure of war, but as a hilarious reminder that even the greatest conquerors can be undone by the smallest mistakes. Or in this case, the smallest teeth. And while Napoleon moved on, Trying to shake off the embarrassment, this strange event lingered in history. After all, how many emperors can say they lost a battle to carrots and cabbage-loving fluffballs? But here's where it gets even nuttier. This wasn't just an isolated moment of silliness. Believe it or not, rabbits and other animals have popped up in history in strange and unexpected ways. Which brings us to our next twist. Napoleon's rabbit fiasco might sound like the punchline to a joke, but it actually fits into a much bigger, stranger pattern. History is full of moments when animals flipped the script and made humans, especially powerful ones, look foolish, vulnerable, or downright unlucky. Take Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who marched elephants over the Alps in 218 BCE. He thought those elephants would terrify the Romans. Instead, many of the animals collapsed from exhaustion or slipped on icy terrain. They caused as much chaos for Hannibal's own army as they did for his enemies. His brilliant plan turned into a logistical nightmare, all because Mother Nature and animal behavior don't bend to strategy. Or consider the Battle of Pelusium in 525 BCE, where Persian King Cambyses II supposedly used cats as psychological weapons against the Egyptians. Cats were sacred in Egypt, and when the Persians released them onto the battlefield, the Egyptians hesitated to attack. Clever, right? But according to some sources, the plan spiraled into utter confusion, with soldiers tripping over the panicked animals. Even success with animals often came with bizarre, unpredictable side effects. And then there's one of the most infamous disasters of all, the Great Emu War of 1932 in Australia. That's right, an actual war against giant birds. Farmers struggling with crop destruction called in the military to deal with massive flocks of emus. Armed with machine guns, soldiers tried to wipe them out. The result? Total failure. The emus scattered, regrouped, and outmaneuvered the humans. After weeks of trying, the army gave up, humiliated. The emus had effectively won. Seen through this lens, Napoleon's battle with rabbits doesn't seem so out of place. Animals have a knack for defying expectations, reminding us that nature isn't easily controlled. In fact, it's often humans, armed with technology, strategy, and arrogance, who end up looking ridiculous. But what makes Napoleon's case especially embarrassing is who he was. Hannibal, Cambyses, and the Australian soldiers were grappling with powerful, dangerous, or massive animals. Napoleon? He lost to fluffy, carrot-munching bunnies, creatures you could scoop up in your hands, creatures that usually end up in children's petting zoos. The contrast is what makes the story so unforgettable. Still, there's something symbolic about it. Rabbits are often associated with fertility, abundance, and unpredictability. In folklore, they're tricksters, always slipping away, outsmarting bigger predators. Maybe, in a strange way, Napoleon's humiliation wasn't just an accident. Maybe it was a reminder that even the world's most powerful man could be undone by nature's smallest pranksters, and it wasn't just an amusing anecdote for those who witnessed it. Word spread quickly. Officers laughed about it in letters, courtiers whispered about it in Paris, and soon Napoleon's enemies used the story as propaganda. How could a man who claimed to control Europe fail to control rabbits? It chipped away at his carefully crafted image. The rabbit rampage, then, isn't just funny. It's part of a larger truth. Animals have always had the power to challenge human pride. And sometimes the results are deadly serious. Other times, like this one, they're just hilariously absurd. But if you think Napoleon brushed it off and never thought about rabbits again, think again. This bizarre incident may have had a longer-lasting effect on the emperor's public image than anyone realized. Imagine being Napoleon Bonaparte, victor of Austerlitz, master of Europe, and feared by kings across the continent, only to be remembered by some people as the general who was chased off a field by rabbits. That, in essence, was the strange shadow cast by this surreal event in 1807. At first glance, it might seem like a silly footnote, the kind of thing no serious historian would bother with. But stories have power, and for someone like Napoleon, whose entire empire rested on his reputation, the rabbit fiasco became a symbol. His strength was built not just on cannons and armies, but on the idea that he was unbeatable. Once people started chuckling about rabbits chasing him down, that myth cracked ever so slightly. In private, Napoleon likely fumed. Some accounts suggest he laughed along at first, trying to brush it off. But think about it. This was a man obsessed with image, who commissioned portraits that made him look larger than life, who rewrote his own history books to paint himself as destiny's chosen son. Losing face in front of his own men, even over something as trivial as rabbits, was the kind of humiliation he would not easily forget, and his enemies certainly didn't let it slide. Satirical newspapers and cartoonists in Europe pounced on the story. Imagine caricatures of the mighty emperor, not astride a horse but fleeing from bunnies. British satirists in particular, who loved mocking Napoleon as Little Boney, found endless joy in this tale. For them, it was propaganda gold. If Napoleon couldn't handle rabbits, how could he conquer Britain? But the real kicker is how the event stuck in popular memory. History has plenty of tragic massacres, bloody revolutions, and grand battles, but the rabbit rampage lives on precisely because it's so bizarre. People love the image of a powerful man brought low by something harmless, even comical. It's the same reason we laugh when kings slip on banana peels in cartoons. It humanizes them. It reminds us that even the mighty can be humbled in the weirdest ways. And in Napoleon's case, this humiliation foreshadowed something bigger: cracks in his invincible image. Just 2 years later, in 1809, Napoleon faced major setbacks in the Peninsular War. A few years after that, he disastrously invaded Russia, losing most of his army not to battles but to starvation, cold, and poor planning. The rabbits might not have cursed him exactly, but the story almost feels like a tiny preview of what was to come. A man who thought he could control everything, undone by forces he underestimated. Today, the rabbit incident is often told as a quirky anecdote in history books, did you know? Fact for history buffs. But in truth, it's much more than that. It reveals the fragility of power, the importance of image, and the strange ways history remembers people. Napoleon won dozens of battles, changed the face of Europe, and influenced law codes still in use today. But ask a casual history fan, and sometimes the first thing they'll say is, wasn't he the guy who got chased by rabbits? It's proof that history doesn't just remember the victories. Sometimes it clings to the ridiculous. And before we wrap up this nutty tale, let's step back and ask, what lessons can we actually learn from this? Because as funny as it is, Napoleon's rabbit disaster has surprisingly deep takeaways about pride, power, and the unpredictability of life. So, what do we actually take away from the story of Napoleon versus the rabbits? Sure, it's hilarious on the surface, a mighty emperor undone by fluffy critters. But beneath the comedy, this odd moment in history teaches us more than you might expect. Lesson 1. Never underestimate the small stuff. Napoleon, like so many leaders, believed he could control every outcome. He planned battles down to the hour, manipulated entire nations, and carefully crafted his image as untouchable. But all it took was a swarm of rabbits, tiny, underestimated creatures, to send his carefully staged celebration spiraling into chaos. History is full of moments like this, where leaders ignored the little things, only for those details to undo them. The rabbits remind us that sometimes it's the smallest, silliest forces that topple the giants. Lesson 2, image is everything. Napoleon wasn't just fighting battles with cannons and muskets, he was fighting battles of reputation. When word of the rabbit debacle spread, it wasn't the actual event that mattered most, but how people talked about it. Enemies painted him as ridiculous, allies smirked behind his back, and even history books preserved the moment as comedy. In a way, the rabbits showed how fragile an emperor's image could be. And if Napoleon's legacy can be dented by bunnies, it proves no leader is safe from ridicule. Lesson 3. Nature doesn't play by human rules. Whether it's elephants stumbling in the Alps, emus outmaneuvering soldiers, or rabbits charging the Emperor of France, history reminds us that animals don't obey strategy. Nature always has the last laugh. Napoleon's rabbits weren't plotting revenge. They were just hungry, tame animals expecting food. Yet their natural behavior turned into a scene that humiliated one of the most powerful men in history. It's a humbling reminder that humans aren't as in control as we like to think. Lesson 4. History loves the absurd. We often assume history only remembers the serious, battles, treaties, revolutions. But more often than not, it's the odd, absurd, and downright embarrassing moments that stick. Why? Because they're memorable. They're human. The rabbit story has survived for over 200 years, not because it changed the course of geopolitics, but because it makes us laugh, and in that laughter we remember Napoleon as a real person, not just a statue or a myth. When you put it all together, Napoleon's bunny battle is more than a funny anecdote. It's a story about pride, unpredictability, and the way history twists even the smallest accidents into legends. And here's the nuttiest part. In a lifetime of commanding armies, reshaping Europe and crowning himself emperor, Napoleon never faced an enemy as enduring in memory as those rabbits. His conquest faded, his empire collapsed, but the rabbits, they live on in history's strangest chapter. So next time you hear about Napoleon Bonaparte, don't just think of the battles or the glory. Think of the day 3,000 rabbits charged the Emperor of France and won. And there you have it. The tale of the day Napoleon Bonaparte, master of Europe, was forced into retreat by an army of bunnies. History is full of bloody battles, political betrayals, and world-changing treaties, but sometimes it's the weird little accidents that stick around the longest. The Rabbit Rampage of 1807 wasn't about strategy or empire. It was about a hungry horde of furballs turning the world's most powerful man into the butt of a joke. What makes this story truly nutty isn't just that it happened, it's what it says about power. Napoleon could bend nations to his will, but he couldn't bend nature. He could craft his image as a near-mythical conqueror, but one slip, one absurd moment was enough to crack that illusion. And maybe that's why we love this story so much. It's a reminder that no matter how powerful someone seems, they can still be brought down by the unexpected, even by rabbits. So the next time life throws you something bizarre, remember Napoleon. If the Emperor of France could be humbled by bunnies, maybe we can all learn to laugh when things don't go as planned. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed this dive into the weirdest rabbit hunt of all time, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more bizarre stories from history, and share this with a friend who could use a laugh. Who knows? They might just need to hear about the day rabbits defeated Napoleon. Until next time, stay curious, stay nutty, and remember, history isn't just about wars and kings, it's also about the chaos of the unexpected.